Okay, let's get started. But first, let me bring you up to speed. Yeah, I have a fresh AdonisJS application. Well, not that fresh because I have installed and set up Flare. And this is what we'll be building on in this course. In this lesson, we'll be looking at how to track users' browser sessions. And we'll be doing that after users have logged in. So if we take a look at the Alt controller, this is the point where the user is logged in. And also inside the register controller, users will be logged in after creating an account. So we want to be able to track users' browser sessions at these points. To keep the implementation for that contained in a central place, we are going to be creating a service class. So inside the app directory, we are going to create a new services directory. Then inside it, we'll create a login session.cs file. This will be the service class. Now we can start adding the implementation for tracking users' browser sessions. By tracking users' browser sessions, I mean saving users' browser details in the database. So we are going to create a sessions table in our database. So I'm going to make the model and the migrations together. So model, which I will call session, then -m to create the corresponding migration file. Then we can open it up. The table is going to have a couple of fields. First, let me get rid of the timestamps as we won't be needing them. Yes, the table is going to have an ID field, but it's not going to be an auto-incremented integer, but instead it's going to be a string that will contain the session ID. And we're going to make it the primary key and make sure it is unique, because we want it to be unique for each user browser session. Then we have a column for the user ID. And this is going to be unsigned, an index, because we'll be using it to query the table. And it's going to reference the user ID in the users table. Then on delete, we're going to cascade down. Then lastly, it's going to be not nullable. I'm going to save to reformat. Next, we have another column, which will be for the user IP address. And it's going to be not nullable. Next, we have a column for the user agent, which will contain the browser details. Also, this is not going to be nullable. Lastly, we are going to have a timestamp column, which will hold the last time the user was active. I'm going to call this last active at. Also, this will be not nullable. Let's do the same thing in the model. This is going to be a string. Then I can get rid of this and update this to be the last active at field. And it will be auto-created whenever a record is inserted in the table. Next, let's add the column for the user ID. Public user ID, which is going to be a number. I'm going to duplicate this for the IP address. This is going to be a string. Then I'll duplicate this one more time, which will be for the user agent. Now we can run the migration. Migration run. Now we can go back to the login session class and add the implementation for storing the browser session. I'm going to create a public method, which I will call save. This method is going to accept 3 parameters. It's going to accept the user that just logged in. It's going to accept the request. And lastly, it's going to accept session. So user, which is going to be the type of user. Then request, which is going to be a type of request contract. Let me import that. Then lastly, session. It's going to be a type of session contract. And all we have to do inside the method is insert the record inside the sessions table. So await session.create. The ID is going to be session.sessionID. That is the current session ID as at when the user logged in. Then the user ID is going to be user.id. And the IP address is going to be request.ip. And lastly, the user agent is going to be request.header. They want to get the user agent from the header. Before we go on to use this class, I'm going to export it. Now we can make use of it. So let's head over to the auth controller. Immediately the user is logged in, we're going to save the user session. So I wait login session.save. We need the authenticated user, so I'm going to save it in a variable and pass it here. Then I'll pass the request as well. Then lastly the session. Then we need to do the same thing inside the register controller. Again, after the user is logged in. Now let's check this out in the browser. I'm going to create a new account. I have successfully created an account. If we check the database, so here is the account I just created, and here is the session details. So this is the browser details, and this is the current session ID. Now let me log in with another browser. So this is Safari. I'm logged in, and if we refresh, so we now have two records. This is for Safari, while this is for Firefox. So that is how to track and save user browser sessions.